Every country is different, and it depends on a lot of things. It depends on how much was seeded in the country. Every country except for China. It originated in China, and then it's seeded in other countries, including the United States. How you respond to that initial influx of infected individuals before you start mobilizing a response has a great impact on what ultimately would happen. Unfortunately for Italy, they did not do that right away. It was kind of an open country. People were coming in, and before they knew it, they had a lot of cases that got out of control. One of the things that we did that was very important was when the president decided early on to shut down the influx of travel from China, and then subsequently to shut down the influx from the European countries. I mean, we still have cases now that we have to deal with that are very serious, but it would have been much worse had we not done that.
A special series about the threat from influenza. Every year, the seasonal flu emerges and kills tens of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands globally. But there's an even graver concern. Public health officials fear the emergence of a new, previously unknown flu virus that could be far more lethal and become a pandemic by spreading across the world. As William Brangham reports, it's happened before.
The flu was attacking her lungs and filling them with fluid. She was then medevaced to University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where she was eventually put under the care of Dr. Holt Murray.
The lungs become very boggy, they fill with water, and you're not able to move oxygen from the outside world into your bloodstream.
You can't breathe.
You can't breathe, yeah.
It kept getting worse. Her lungs were failing. She was put on a ventilator, but even that couldn't get enough oxygen into her.
It was a nurse who slipped up and made a comment about me dying. And I was just like, what? Oh yeah, you died like twice. You were on a machine to keep you alive. And I'm like...
That machine, called an ECMO, took out her dark, depleted blood, pumped it full of oxygen, and fed it back into her body.
And it runs through the pump in the oxygenator and comes out cherry red.
That is a very intensive intervention to try to save someone's life.
It's as intensive as it gets. We're taking 5 liters of blood a minute, taking it out of the body and returning it.
It went way, 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 way up.
Days like that are what keep Dr. Anthony Fauci up at night.
In 2017-18, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations.
Dr. Jeremy Brown directs the Office of Emergency Care Research at the National Institutes of Health, and he wrote the book Influenza, the 100-year hunt to cure the deadliest disease in history.
We are definitely seeing a higher number of flu cases this year than last year.
It's States may be reaching a peak, and so far it looks like a more severe season than others in recent memory. John Yang gets an update on why and what you need to know.
This flu season started earlier than in the past, and the Centers for Disease Control says it's the most widespread outbreak it has ever seen.
It's not CDC, it's not NIH, it's not FDA or anyone else. It's you. Your response was, that's right. So you're the key person, right?
My role is to be the principal advisor to the Secretary on these matters, yes.
You're the key person in the government for medical preparedness, public health emergencies. You're the key person in the United States government.
In HHS.
Got it. Let's go to the first slide if we could. I just want to put up a couple slides. This is straight from your website, just to be clear. It says, you are the person, your agency, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, to lead the nation in preventing, preparing for, and responding to the adverse health effects of public health emergencies and disasters. Further down, the Secretary of HHS delegates to you the leadership role of all health, medical services support, function in health emergency, and public health events. You're the key person. Correct?
That's what the legislation says, yes.
No, that's not the legislation. That's your website.
That is my role.
Yeah, that's your website. The legislation definitely says that. Your website confirms
that. That is my role.
Yes. You're the key person. Have you?
Welcome to Life in Biology. I'm Dr. Joel Graff, and this is episode number 9. Today we're going to be talking about the Spanish flu and what I consider to be a famous experiment where they resurrected the Spanish flu, the 1918 flu, in 2005 after all the virus had been extinct from the world. And the severe damage was due to something called cytokine storms. The first time I ever heard the term cytokine storms was in regard to the 1918 flu virus. Basically, cytokines are proteins that cells use to communicate with each other. Cytokines often tell you if there's danger, and so cells start making these danger signals, and it brings in more immune cells, and the immune cells are all acting up, and they can cause damage to your tissue, and that causes this severe pathology from the virus. And then we talked about secondary bacterial infections earlier. Those secondary bacterial infections can then take advantage of a damaged lung or airway and get hold and cause really severe pneumonia that could be lethal.
Way up.
Days like that are what keep Dr. Anthony Fauci up at night.
In 2017-18, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations. You do that every year for 20, 30, 40 years.
That's a huge toll.
At the end of that time, that's a huge toll. About 80,000 deaths.
Never opened myself this way. Life is ours, we live it our way. All these words I don't just say, and nothing else matters. Trust I seek and I find in you. reach no matter how far.
So this is the 2021 season, and I make sure national is selected now. And with 2021, I hit download. Download the data as it's displayed. Yeah, that's right. And what should we do with it? Let's open it up. There we go. We've got a new spreadsheet. All right, so we're using the CDC's data, and we're going to tally it up. So this is for the country. Now, again, they do the same thing here. Total deaths is total deaths from all causes. We want total P&I deaths. We don't need deaths from all causes right now. And we're just simply going to add influenza to pneumonia, and that gives you P&I. Copy that. Give this a little format help. All right, now we're going to add this up. There's 154,000 people that have died from P&I so far in the United States in the 2020-2021 season, according to the CDC's data, according to the system, this FluView mortality system that we just downloaded this data from. So this is their count. This is their their database. This is their, I mean, I don't know how to be more clear that this is coming directly from the CDC. Right? I mean, we just downloaded this. We just hit this download button. And after doing that, we're in the spreadsheet, and here's the number. This is the data. There's total P&I deaths, 154,000. Let's chart it. Let's see what it looks like. As I add the data for the deaths, I begin in week 40. That's first week of October 2020. And as I add them, you'll see. All right. So if I stop at the last week where we have 100% reporting, which is week 2, it appears that it did peak earlier than that, which is good. Now, the next week, we don't have full reporting in. And then this next week, it's not even close to full, so I'm reluctant to show it to you yet. But it does appear we're coming off of the peak. Now, will there be a second node again? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Let me format the chart so it makes some sense here. These labels are wrong, and that should be week number. So what you're looking at here is how many people died each week in the United States from P&I in the 2021 season. So this is 2020, 2021. And that's what we have. So this is coming in straight from the CDC. This is the data from this website, from the CDC. And we just downloaded it and charted it. And according to them, there's 154,000 people that have died. How many weeks had over 10,500? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks have had over 10,500 people die from P&I. There's pneumonia and influenza deaths, not coronavirus. Different. We just looked at coronavirus before. So this was October, first week, coming into December, New Year's, and it appears it's trailing down now. But this is how I do it, and this is where the data comes from, and I wanted you to see that. So FluView Interactive is one of the websites that shows information, but there's a lot of confusing stuff here that's not necessarily the original source. And one of the things that is interesting, though, is if you go to pediatric mortality and you look at, well, how many kids have died so far this season from influenza? And if you notice in their overall picture here, they don't show you the current season. They show you previous seasons, but not the prior season. When you click on View the Application, it'll take you to it. And what you'll see here, this is Pediatric Mortality Surveillance. This is the official CDC disease, this is their site. And this is for children younger than 18 years of age. Okay, laboratory confirmed influenza-associated deaths in children younger than 18 years of age. All right, so that's what we're looking at. And what you're going to see is that in 2017-18, you had 188. In 2018-19, you had 144. 2019-20, you had 195. And in 2020-2021, you have 1. So this season, there's only 1 death that's been attributed to influenza amongst children compared to at this time. So right now we're in week 4, week 5. So week 4, week 5, last season, influenza deaths amongst children were already peaking, right, at their high. If we go to week 4, week 5 over here in this 2018-19 season, also the deaths were already up above a certain threshold, and we're on a weekly basis. Same thing if we go to 2017-18 and we look at week number 4, week number 5. What we see is that death counts were up over 10 per week of kids, and yet in the 2020-2021 season there's only 1. And we have to juxtapose this single pediatric death against the prior seasons, right? So if in the last 3 seasons there was 188, 144, 195, and this season there's 1, Malcolm Gladwell would call that an outlier. Okay? Now we have to look at that outlier against what we just charted a second ago, meaning we know from this system that there's 154,000 P&I deaths in the United States. We just downloaded this. This is 2021. This is this season, right? This is right as we speak, 2020, 2021, not last year. And when we charted that, it showed us 154,000 people have already died. Here's the chart. And only 1 of those was a kid? Only 1 of the 154,339 people that have died of P&I since October. What we're hearing from the CDC is only 1 of those was a child? How is that possible?
At that time, that's a huge toll in illness and in deaths.
Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health. He says while many take the so-called seasonal flu for granted, it still kills tens of thousands in the U.S. every year.
So this is the influenza virus. This is the inner core of the influenza virus.
But the seasonal flu isn't really what Fauci loses sleep over. It's the concern that a new flu strain emerges, a virus we've never seen before and have no protections against, like what happened in 1918.
In 1918, we were swimming in the dark, as it were.
That year, a new virus emerged, triggering one of the worst pandemics in human history. Often called the Spanish flu, this virus killed at least 50 million people worldwide and reached almost every nation on Earth. About 675,000 people died in the U.S. alone.
So you had this disease that was spread very quickly across the world, that was killing millions of people, and yet people didn't know what it was that was killing them.
Brown says not only did doctors not understand this was a virus sickening people, but they had no antibiotics to treat the secondary deadly pneumonia that often accompanies flu. The treatments they did have often made things worse.
So you had bloodletting, you had enemas. Everybody seemed to get an enema back then.
Exactly at the moment when you're incredibly dehydrated because of the pneumonia.
And then whiskey and champagne.
All this led to a higher than normal death rate among 20 to 40-year-olds, the people typically much less susceptible to flu. More soldiers were killed by 1918's flu than died in battle during World War I.
Asian influenza spreads rapidly.
Since 1918, the world has seen 3 flu pandemics. Thankfully, none has been as deadly as the first. There was the 1957 Asian flu, 11 years later, the Hong Kong flu, and most recently, the 2009 swine flu.
It wasn't particularly virulent, so that the number of deaths in 2009 among the general population was even less than a regular seasonal flu, even though there were many, many more infections.
The concern, of course, is that the next pandemic would be both contagious and deadly. That's what has public health officials worried today.
Concerns over the flu. The first day of winter is still a few weeks away, but the start of flu season appears to be here, with between 1.7 and 2.5 million flu-related illnesses already reported. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, forecasts suggest that flu activity will continue to rise. There's a 40% chance it will now peak in December, which the CDC notes would be considered early compared to previous years. We are joined at the table by CBS News medical contributor Dr. David Agus. Doctor, good morning. Do we know why it seems to be hitting early this year and what that means for the rest of flu season?
We don't know why flu season happens when or where, but it's happening early. It's clear. It's happening in the southern United States. New Orleans particularly hit. And, 1.7 and 2.5 million people. That's a big number early.
Is it too late to get the vaccine right now for people that haven't?
That's
like
a
me?
leading question.
I know. Well, I haven't.
You're getting it today.
Okay, that's what I meant. Really,
no question
genuine.
about it. Yeah,
Okay.
we don't know whether this is going to be an early peak, say it'll peak in December, or whether it's going to be drawn out like last year. On an average year, 125 to 200 people a day die of the flu. So this is preventable, most of these deaths with the vaccine, even though the vaccine hasn't been great the last couple of years. This year, the early strain that we're seeing is type B, called Victoria, and that classically happens in February, March. This year is happening early. We don't really know any of these trends and predictions what's going to happen, but what we do know is it's here. What we do know is it's early, and what we do know is we have a preventive shot.
Right. I will get it, I promise.
Yeah, no, and because you have
I happen to have one.
Yes, I was going to say.
If you do,
yes. Give DJ.
Trust I seek and I find in you. Every day for us something new. Open mind for a different view. And nothing else matters. Never care for what they say. Never care for games they play. Never care for what they do. Never care for what they know. That I know.
In today's morning rounds, this flu season is on track to be one of the worst in recent history. In terms of the number of people infected, flu is now widespread in almost every single state, and nearly 10 million people have become ill so far. 4,800 of those people have died.
Take a look. You see all that red? I mean, how could you not? That should be a red flag about just how bad this year's flu season has gotten. The CDC says influenza is widespread in all but 2 states and Washington, D.C. It's that map, that rampant spreading virus we should be worried about. But in the last week, most of what we hear about when it comes to health news is the coronavirus.
There's growing concern about the coronavirus tonight.
The coronavirus outbreak grows rapidly in China.
This is the epicenter of the virus outbreak.
Like in previous outbreaks of coronavirus.
Screenings for coronavirus are underway at Minneapolis-St. Paul International.
So once you sift through all of that coverage and just take a deep breath, let's bring the focus back to where health officials here say it should be, the flu. Here's Adrian.
Everyone's freaking out about the coronavirus. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Got nothing to do with the Mexican beer, by the way.
Right. The little hint of lie.
Laughter. It's the medicine Dr. Frank Rame uses to calm his patients. He's an infectious disease specialist at Allina Health.
That is all about neuraminidase.
He tells it like it is.
It's not a disease you want to get. 2 or 3% are going to die at the least. There's basically no treatment for this except support. Intubation, for instance, if the lungs fail. The coronavirus is a big deal.
But Rame says there's something bigger that should have us all worried.
Influenza is way more infectious and way harder to stop.
In the first 2 weeks of 2020, the flu killed about 5,000 people in the U.S., mostly through associated pneumonia. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that so far this season, there have been nearly 15 million flu illnesses, 140,000 people sent to the hospital, and 8,200 deaths in the U.S.
So that's a lot on the flu, so we'll go to coronavirus for just a second because the symptoms of that are similar to the flu.
Numbers may surprise you. From October 1st, 2019 through January 25th, 2020, the Centers for Disease Control estimates nationwide 19 million to 26 million people had flu illnesses, and 10,000 to 25,000 died from the flu.
Infectious diseases. He's part of the effort to fight future outbreaks. He joins us from the headquarters of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Fauci, good morning. Always good to see you.
Good morning.
First, let me ask you this. Why is this year's virus so deadly?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. As we know, the vaccine this year, although it's always best to get vaccinated, is not the perfect vaccine. It is not, as we would say, favorably efficacious in the sense that we only don't know right now what the efficacious is going to be, but it likely is not going to be much more than around 30%.
Because I give a lot of lectures, more than I really should, I generally rest my voice for a while, and when you do that, I get the full component back. But that wasn't the case this time.
He believes a combination of having the flu in December and inflamed trachea and then nonstop work once the pandemic hit may be to blame.
I want to stop here.
Sounds pretty dubious to me.
Wait a minute. Does the flu vaccine not work on Dr. Fauci? He had the flu. He had the flu.
Yeah.
Did he get the vaccine? It gets
worse.
worse.
He did.
Listen, this is the nation's top expert. He's going to tell you all the remedies he's tried.
By the time I got to March, it was clear that my voice was shot because I would wake up in the morning and do, the Today Show live. and it would be like I had a frog in my throat, no matter how much I gargled with salt, how much I drank a hot soup or a hot coffee. When I would get in front of the TV, I couldn't get my normal voice.
Huh. Doesn't he have medication? Is there nothing medical science can do? He's doing salt water? Chicken soup?
That's interesting.
Chicken soup?
Yeah.
I know.
Well, now he's still talking. His voice sounds the same, but Polyps usually.
I think he's just explaining why he was told to shut up and go sit on the sidelines for a while. And now he's saying it again.
For something else.
Yeah, now he's saying it again. Like, well, I'm going to have to be quiet again now because I kind of overdid it. Okay.
He didn't have to be. You can still go to the meetings and write stuff down. You don't have to talk yak like he does.
Don't know right now what the efficaciousness is going to be, but it likely is not going to be much more than around 30%. I say that with some trepidation because I don't want people not to get vaccinated. Every type of protection against the virus with a vaccine is better than no protection at all. So a combination of a vaccine that doesn't work very well and a really bad virus.
So given that combination, Dr. Fauci, what should people do?
Well, the first thing you should do, and again, getting back to vaccination, if you have not been vaccinated, you should get vaccinated. That's for sure. Then if, in fact, you do get infected, if you have what looks like it's going to be a serious infection, don't hesitate to get to a healthcare provider who can get you an anti-influenza antiviral like Tamiflu. This is particularly true for people who fall into the risk categories where complications are common. So if you're an elderly person or you have an underlying disease, you should not wait to get anti-flu medication.
Along with everyone at home dealing with this. But this notion about Tamiflu, you were mentioning that you were on it. Obviously, you're a doctor. It's easier to get. But it's really important for people to consider this at home.
Exactly. And I also treat pregnant women. But in general, the vulnerable high-risk groups that should consider Tamiflu as a prophylactic measure to reduce their risk of getting sick if they've had direct contact. High-risk groups include people over the age of 65, anyone with chronic medical condition like asthma, pregnant women, or anyone with a weakened immune system. Those are the vulnerable groups.
And in the meantime, Jen, we'd heard for years that you have to be on Tamiflu within 48 hours of symptoms, but you've learned something else now.
That's really the old thinking. There was that firm line in the sand about the 48-hour mark. Now there's new data that suggests that even after the first 48 hours of symptoms, antiviral medications like Tamiflu can be helpful. So that should not be a reason to withhold treatment.
Couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trust who we are.
You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse. In fact, let's look at a model of a virus spread through the air like the Spanish flu back in 1918. So here's what would happen. It would spread throughout the world very, very quickly. And you can see there's over 30 million people die from that epidemic. So this is a serious problem. We should be concerned. But in fact, we can build a really good response system.
Ebola has killed more than 10,000 people in West Africa, and although it has slowed, the epidemic continues. But despite the global panic Ebola has caused, some fear that the next epidemic could affect far more people if it involves a disease that can spread through the air like measles or influenza. I'm Stephen Morrissey, managing editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and I'm talking with Nicole Lurie, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
It's not CDC, it's not NIH, it's not FDA or anyone else. It's you. Your response was, that's right. So you're the key person, right? For medical preparedness, public health emergencies, you're the key person in the United States government.
In HHS.
Got it.
Dr. Lurie, Bill Gates writes in a recent Perspective article that of all the things that could kill millions of people around the world, the most likely is an epidemic stemming from natural causes or bioterrorism. How does your agency prioritize potential health threats, and does it consider epidemics to be one of the major concerns?
Absolutely it does. I think we recognize bioterror threats, and we prepare for them all the time. And we understand that synthetic biology makes that easier to do all the time. We also worry about accidental releases from laboratories where well-intentioned scientists work with dangerous pathogens. So we place a lot of emphasis also on lab safety issues. But I think we all know Mother Nature is a terrific bioterrorist. And whether it was H1N1, whether it was Ebola, whether it's going to be the next emerging disease, we do have to worry about a pandemic. And like Bill Gates, we worry a lot about pandemic influenza or something else that could cause a pandemic of that magnitude.
Gates argues that we need a global warning and response system for such outbreaks, like the system that NATO has for response to threats of war. How feasible do you think that kind of international disease response system would be?
Well, I think it's critical that we do that, and a huge part for years has been doing better surveillance to detect threats early so that you can prevent avoidable epidemics of one kind or another. And there is increasing momentum beyond just doing this for influenza to do this for infectious diseases broadly. I do want to say, though, that as important as it is to get these early warning systems, which we all agree we need to do something when we get that signal. We also worry about accidental releases from laboratories where well-intentioned scientists work with dangerous pathogens.
Gee, the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malcolm, but I think things are a little bit different than you and I had feared.
Yeah, I know. They're a lot worse.
Now, wait a second. Now, we haven't even seen the part where
Don't let him talk. There's no reason. No, I want to hear every viewpoint. I really do.
Yeah, don't you see the danger, John, inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
About Dr. Fauci is it's been 100 years since that lethal 1918 flu, and you're saying there could be one virus that could be catastrophic.
Living our way. All these words I don't just say, and nothing else matters.
And you can think of flu in 1918 and otherwise like that garbage can or like a shot to the ribs. It lands you on your back for a few weeks. It creates inflammation, fluid buildup in your lungs where you need them clear for oxygen, for gas exchange. And pneumonia is really, really deadly. It always has been, and it still is. And that's what killed people in 1918. The other clue is that it was an H1N1 virus. And so how do we know that? We know that because people like Jeff Taubenberger and his team have actually gone back to tissue samples from 1918. So here we have wax-embedded autopsy tissue samples taken from a victim of the Spanish flu. And Jeff Taubenberger and his team take slices of that material and they amplify up that genome that we saw before. So we know exactly genetically what this thing looked like. In fact, the one complete genome that we have from 1918 comes from here. So this is a place called Brevik Mission, which is a little village in Alaska. And in 1918, the Spanish flu pretty much wiped out the whole village. And a lot of people ended up in mass graves. And this guy here, Johan Hultin, he's a virologist who for years had been saying, we might be able to get virus out of those graves. If they were buried in permafrost, you might have good preservation of material. He tried in the 50s, at a time before genomics and amplifying gene sequences. What he needed to do then was actually get a live virus. Couldn't do it. Not possible. Everything's kind of dead and fragmented. So he went back in the 90s on a solitary trip. I thought this was funny. So he carried just one tool, a pair of garden clippers borrowed from his wife without permission. And let me just go back. There they are. Okay. So from this mass grave, via Mrs. Hulton's garden clippers to the big screen. That's not just a flu genome. That is the Spanish flu genome from that victim, from that mass grave in Alaska. Those A's, C's, G's, and T's are the virus that killed that person and so many others in 1918.
Michael.
Yeah, Rich.
So, on that one slide showing the strains circulating through humans through time, at the end you had the H3N2 and you had the H1N1 and it said H1N1 lab escape. H1N1 and it said H1N1 lab escape.
Yeah, so I thought someone might ask about that. So in 1957, the Spanish flu like H1N1 went extinct when H2N2 emerged. In 1968, H3N2 kicked out H2N2. But in 1977, there was a kind of mini pandemic, and H1N1 reemerged. And bottom line is, if you look at the molecular clocks, it was frozen in time, not even since 1957, but it was a 1950 H1N1 strain. And it's virtually certain that it was an accidental escape, probably from an experimental strain from China or Russia. And so, yes, the worst pathogen in human history was accidentally re-released, and not too many people know about it until you guys.